We are going to wait just a few moments to give folks an opportunity to join, and then we will begin today's discussion. Thank you again for joining us. I can see folks trickling in. Going to give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we will get started. Thank you all again for joining. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of our Homeroom with Education webinar series. Today's conversation is focused on beyond language barriers, ensuring success for English language learners in U.S. schools. My name is Michael Sheehy, and I'm a senior policy analyst on the K-12 team here at the Hunt Institute. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Hunt Institute, we were founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, and we serve as a resource for policymakers on education issues across the education spectrum through both in-person and virtual convenings, research, and other forms of technical assistance. Now, before getting into the conversation today, I want to provide a brief logistical overview of what to expect. We'll start with a moderated discussion with our panelists, and then pivot to a Q&A with our audience. If you have any questions throughout the discussion, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to address those during the discussion. Additionally, we will be recording this conversation, and in the next couple of days, we will be posting it on our YouTube channel. Now, we also encourage you to join us on Twitter, where you can participate in the conversation live using the hashtag #EdHomeroom. And we will also be tweeting from our Twitter account @Hunt_Institute. Fabulous. My logistics are out of the way. Now time for the great stuff. Let's dive into our conversation. The United States has witnessed a remarkable increase in the number of English language learners and multilingual students in the past few decades. This demographic shift reflects the diverse and multicultural nature of our society. However, even with this substantial growth in ELL student populations, it's evident that some students still face challenges that necessitate additional supports and accommodations to facilitate their language acquisition journey. As these students integrate into our educational systems and society at large, it becomes increasingly imperative to provide them with the necessary tools and supports to help them thrive academically. This is not only a matter of equitable education, but also a reflection of our commitment to fostering a more inclusive and diverse society that values the contributions of all its members. Therefore, we must take proactive steps to understand and meet the needs of these students, both inside and outside of the classroom, to ensure they have every opportunity. And in doing so, we not only invest in the future of these students, but also in the future of our society as a whole. Now, to that end, I am more than pleased to introduce our full panel of speakers today. We are joined by Superintendent Chris Rakedahl, who is the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Washington. Nilda Aguirre is the Executive Director of the National Association for Bilingual Education. Dr. Sydney Snyder is a Principal Associate at Support Ed. And Alicia Moreno Ramirez, who currently serves as the Director of the Multilingual Support Division within the California Department of Education. To all my panelists, thank you all so much for joining us. And with that, we'll jump right in. And again, for our audience, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Superintendent Rakedahl, this first question is for you. The US has a diverse population of different languages, and with an increasing amount of English language and multilingual learners, you have a vision that all students will have access to dual language schools by the year 2040. In this way, you are not only supporting students from Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, and tribal speaking homes, but you are also encouraging cultural inclusivity in the state of Washington. Can you elaborate on how dual language programs are beneficial to these students and the inspiration behind this innovative vision?
Yeah, thank you so much for the great question. Thanks everyone for joining us. These are powerful conversations. Again, I'm Chris Rakedale, State Superintendent of the state of Washington. Our vision really comes from the reality of who we are as a state, and every state's in a different place. But for us, we are very diverse. We've had a long history of immigrant communities coming to Washington State in waves through our history. A steady flow in agriculture, but also, post World War I, post World War II for different reasons. So we sit on the Pacific Rim with lots of needs to be thinking globally and acting locally, as they say. But I don't think we've always upheld that. We've had this concept that you come here, we immediately label you in deficit if you're not an English speaker. And a lot of times in American history, our state's no different. We've starved kids of core content areas in order to teach them English, only to find out that when they've got enough English, they're behind in science or they're behind in math. It's really a deficit-based mindset. And when we came to office here 7 years ago, we said, let's start to turn that around. Let's start speaking about multilinguals as a strength and an asset, their own rich culture, their own understanding, the value that they bring. And in so doing, we said it isn't really about this EL label anymore. It's really about ML, and every student should have access to that. So we've been building out through more than 4 dozen districts and hundreds of schools, the idea that families should have the choice to have a pathway in their elementary school for their 5-year-old who puts on that giant backpack the first day they go into school. And they might say, my kid's gonna learn in a setting that's a two-way dual language model. A lot of Spanish, but as you said, some Mandarin, some other languages. We open it up to our tribal compact schools as well. We're losing elders quite rapidly, but we're trying to preserve those languages so tribal youth and their peers can have it. So kids sitting in classrooms, and 10 are Spanish speakers and 10 are English speakers. And what's empowering about it, of course, is that the deficit mindset goes away, and suddenly the Spanish student has a strength and a power and a superpower. They're teaching their peer Spanish, and the English student is helping their peer learn English. And together they're on a journey that is about understanding each other's culture, ethnicity, and language. And they're building strengths with each other in core subjects. They're taking their dual language in math and science and all the other. But it isn't about a group of students in deficit. It's about them together learning each other's language. Very different mindset.
Fabulous. Thank you, Superintendent. Really love the nod to kind of rethinking this deficit-based framework and the acknowledgement that this approach to multilingual learning goes beyond just reading and English, but it really impacts these students' entire educational journey. So thank you so much. Alicia, this next question is for you. Just a little bit south of Washington, but California has also invested considerable resources into its multilingual populations, including a recent $10 million investment to support dual language immersion grants. Can you speak a bit to how these grants or other strategies within California support these student populations and even educators across the state?
Absolutely. Thank you,
And
Michael. And
if you all have been able to see any impacts from these investments. Oh, no, please.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the question. And also, I feel like there's a big connection to what Chris was saying just a moment ago. Underpinning the wider efforts to support the over 1 million English learner students in California is a larger constellation of strategies by our state superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurman, and the initiative to transform California schools through high quality expanded learning programs, universal meals for all children, emphasis on literacy and biliteracy, and universal pre-kindergarten to lay a foundation for learning through a real whole child approach. I think more specifically, the California English Learner Roadmap Policy, which was unanimously approved by our State Board of Education in 2017 provides guidance to local educational agencies on welcoming, understanding, and educating the diverse population of students classified as English learner students in our schools. It points to assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, intellectual quality of instruction, and meaningful access for all children. Principle 3 is about systems conditions that support effectiveness of these programs for English learner students. And the final principle has to do with alignment and articulation within and across systems. And as you noted, the various investments have also created conditions for focused support on multilingual learning and multilingual programs. Some of the ones one of the ones that you referred to is the Dual Language Immersion Grant Program, which offers support for establishing and expanding dual language programs that provide integrated language learning and academic instruction for not only native speakers of English, but also native speakers of another language, with the common goals of high academic achievement, first and second language acquisition and proficiency, cross-cultural understanding in TK or transitional kindergarten through grade 12, to increase access to dual language education. And we have 27 grantees from across the state who are doing exactly that. They're in their second stage of implementation. And so we're watching really closely to see those outcomes. But in addition to the Dual Language Immersion Grant Program, we have the Educator Workforce Investment Grant, which was focused on EL roadmap implementation, funded in 2019 for $10 million as well, which established a structure for capacity building throughout the state. And it created a system for, a support for system-wide implementation of this comprehensive policy and its 4 interrelated principles. Professional learning has been a central focus, and it was made available to teachers, paraprofessionals, and school leaders to springboard from awareness about policy toward realization and impacts on classrooms. And even more recently, we've seen another $10 million investment as part of an Educator Workforce Investment Grant, but this one focused on effective language acquisition programs, really honing in closely on professional learning opportunities for teachers and paraprofessionals, specifically to support the implementation of effective language acquisition programs, classroom practice for EL students. And this might include integrated language development within and across the content areas, bilingual and biliterate proficiency, and of course, continuing to build and strengthen capacity to further implement the EL roadmap policy. So there are a lot of various types of supports across the system that we're really leaning on. And we're also messaging the importance of integrating the student experience, integrating programs to more fully realize the overarching goals of multilingualism for all California students.
Fabulous, Alicia. Thank you so much. And I love the explicit nod and acknowledgement of the investment in professional development and capacity building. In addition to supporting these students, we need to be able to support our educators in meeting the needs of these students, which is so, so important. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited to hear more about some of these innovative approaches that you all are implementing in California. Nilda, this next question is for you. The National Association for Bilingual Education provides professional development, to that point, provides professional development for teachers as they support their English language learners and multilingual students. One of the prominent concerns for many education stakeholders has been the misidentification of these students as students with disabilities. Could you share some of the strategies that you and your organization use to prevent misidentification, and what impact these methods have on the educational experiences and outcomes of English language learner students?
Thank you for inviting me to be here. NABE was established in 1975 and as a nonprofit organization, and the purpose behind it has always been to work to advocate for educational equity and academic excellence for bilingual, multilingual students in a global society. So with that said, addressing the disproportionality of EL students in special education requires that we have a comprehensive approach that includes appropriate teacher training and culturally responsive assessments. And so what does that mean? Well, there's a lack of understanding for second language acquisition. And so providing teachers with professional development about second language acquisition helps too, is the first step to avoid misidentification. Another thing that I'd like to share with you is that assessing the cognitive abilities of EL students through asset-based rather than deficit-based is the way that we want to see our students being identified, because right now we're looking at what they can't do versus what they can do. Adopting assessments that use the child's native language. And I know that's very difficult when you have a school district that has, 15, 20, 30, 40 languages, but as much as possible, using that child's native language is critical to be able to identify and to assess that student. Also, providing multiple forms of assessment that ensure that the assessment measures the students' abilities rather than the English language skills. So if we're looking at math, if we're looking at those abilities, let's measure those abilities. Let's not just focus on the English skills that students may or may not have at this time. Also, it's so important to consider other sources. For example, interviews with the parents are super helpful because the parents can tell us, no, my child at home is, reads at a 2 or 3 grade levels above in his or her native language, or prior academic records. I mean, I know that's expensive because sometimes we don't have translators to translate those records, but there's a great value in looking at that child's prior records from schools. Also, take a look at that child's language abilities relative to that child's age. So if that child is speaking in another language and you have somebody that can tell you, yes, that child is definitely above level or on level in his or her native language, then it's not a learning disability. And that's where a lot of the questions come in when you're identifying children for these programs. Another huge, which my background, of course, is in gifted education and EL learners. And so one of the things that I would always look at is the disproportionality between a math score and the language score. So we had students scoring in the 90th percentile in math, but yet they were scoring very low in the English language, the language tests. And so I asked the teachers, I said, well, doesn't that say something to you if that child is scoring above in math, but yet below in language? It's a language problem. It's not a disability. It's a language problem. So I think a lot of it has to do, again, that professional development is critical, and professional development in second language acquisition is crucial so that we can stop this misidentification of students in disability, and also increase in gifted, because what happens is there's a disproportionality. We are underrepresented in gifted, and we are overrepresented in disabilities, in programs for disability. So
No,
I'm very passionate about this, by the way.
yeah. Oh no.
This has been my life's work. This has been my life's work, trying to get the students identified correctly.
Well, we can see that passion. Thank you so much for joining us, Nilda. This idea, I'm seeing a through line emerge around, this idea of asset-based, but really this idea that as we're assessing these students, the need for more focused forensic evaluation, examining further beyond just these conventional metrics, like you said, of just how a student performs on an English assessment is so important to getting a better picture of how these students are doing. So I certainly appreciate that perspective, and I'm very excited to hear more from you later in the discussion. Dr. Snyder, this last question as part of our first round is for you. Support Ed offers various services to educators of English learners across both the US and Canada. As part of this work and across these countries, what effective and evidence-based practices have you seen for supporting these students in regards to things like professional development for teachers, curriculum development, or teaching and instruction?
Great. Thank you so much for the question, Michael, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So as was mentioned, professional development for educators, for all educators of multilingual learners, is crucial. We know that our multilingual learners need access to challenging grade level content, but in order to be able to effectively engage with that content, we need to use very specific instructional strategies that have shown to work with this population of students. And that begins, as has also been mentioned, by really building on the assets that they bring to the class, right? So how can we support teachers in leveraging students' cultural and linguistic assets so that those are resources and foundations for all learning that happens in the classroom. And we also want to support students in becoming more independent learners and recognizing how they can leverage those assets. So how do they know about, how can what they know about their home languages, first or second languages, be applied when they're learning English? As we're thinking about other strategies to support English learners, we know that we need to scaffold content instruction. And in our work at Support Ed, we work with educators and we talk about some different categories of scaffolding. So we talk about those materials and resources that can be used, whether it's visuals, whether it's sentence stems and frames, all of these types of materials, graphic organizers that help our English learners or multilingual learners engage successfully with that content. We can also think about the instructional practices that teachers can use. So modeling, right? Let's model ways of thinking. Let's model language. Let's model activities. And that can be a great in-way for our multilingual learners. And then third, think about how we group students intentionally when they're in activities as a way to use that intentional grouping as a scaffold. So perhaps we're grouping students by their home languages where they can talk first and then perform a task in English, or maybe we're grouping them in order so that we can provide differentiated materials, grouping them by linguistic levels or language proficiency levels. Or maybe we group them so they have an opportunity to talk with a lot of different students in the class and really hear that language being used. The important idea with the scaffolding is we're always working towards supporting students in being able to do that work independently. So we provide the scaffold with the intention of gradually removing that scaffold as they acquire proficiency, as they acquire skills. The third piece that's really critical is that teaching of academic language and the integration of content and language instruction. And we see a lot of focus on vocabulary in our work. I think teachers are really good at teaching that technical vocabulary that students need for the content, but we want to go beyond that and really think about how we can support students in deconstructing challenging sentences and how we can support them in producing those complex sentences too, when they're speaking and when they're writing, and how can we embed that academic language teaching across all content areas. So, right, we have a saying, all teachers are teachers of language. So really supporting teachers in understanding what are the linguistic demands of their content area and how can they be explicit in teaching students about that. How does a lab report look different than a poem? And we want to teach students that so that then when they approach a lab report, when they approach a poem, they can really, understand the characteristics of that. And finally, I just want to emphasize the role of peer learning. I talked a little bit about that with peer grouping or intentional grouping, but we know it's really important that our language learners and really all students have an opportunity to engage in structured academic discussions. And I say structured because we want to move away from just asking students to turn and talk when sometimes our multilingual learners or our English learners might not feel quite comfortable, right? How are we setting them up for success in those discussions? Because those discussions really are student driven and they provide authentic opportunities to talk about the content in meaningful ways. They provide opportunities for our students to hear that rich language, that academic language, and try it out. So thinking about how we can really embed those peer learning opportunities, those academic conversations throughout our work and our teaching.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder. It's always so refreshing and a reminder as we're having these discussions that are very focused on policy and systems level to really root those in actionable strategies that educators can take in the classroom, things like grouping students by their native language. These are all such fabulous examples and ideas of this work in practice. So thank you so much for sharing. Just a reminder for our attendees in the audience, please feel free to submit your Q&A questions using the feature at the bottom of the screen. But I would love to ask kind of one final question to all of our panelists as we transition, which is, we've talked a lot about what happens inside the classroom thus far, and while success for all students is not strictly tied to what happens inside the classroom, there is perhaps no group of students whose success is more closely linked to services like wraparound services and the community at large than multi-language learners. In your various capacities and roles and expertise, what are some challenges that these students face, and how can we ensure that we are connecting these students to their broader communities so they have the support they need to succeed both in and outside of the classroom? Superintendent Rakedal, I would love to send this your way first, and then we'll get the conversation moving.
Yeah, thank you. I think the first thing we always should ground ourselves in is these students have a civil right to learning. And when the barrier to that is that there's a lack of whole child supports around them, then the learning can't happen. By default, we have a responsibility to lift up kids differently. There isn't perfect correlation in our state between being a multilingual learner and a migrant student or highly mobile, but it's high correlation. So for us, it is all about the stability of professionals around those students. It's a small thing, but those student records need to move with students. They shouldn't have to restart every time they're mobile and go to another district. We have a goal to feed every child in the state when they're in school, breakfast and lunch, who needs it and who wants it. We've increased that by 500,000 kids in the last 5 or 6 years. So 500,000 more Washington kids have access to meals. It is disproportionately needed by students who are low income, highly mobile, and immigrant students. So those are like building blocks of humanity that make the learning super powerful. I will say, keep kids in their primary language as long as humanly possible if they're not in a dual program. That means thinking differently about something a lot of folks don't necessarily think about when they think about whole child, and that is you've got to have a diverse educator workforce in order to really accomplish either dual or home language embrace as long as needed for young people. You got to have educators who reflect them, both in culture and ethnicity, and certainly in language. And so one of the cool things for us is this para-educator to teacher pipeline. We've got all kinds of strategies around recruiting teachers differently from those who have already shown a commitment to public education. It's where we are gathering lots of momentum for our teaching force to be more diverse. Our traditional pre-service prep programs are getting more diverse, and I appreciate them, but they're not nearly as evolutionary as training our own. So we're wrapping resources around kids, universal meals, universal early learning is the goal in our state. We're about 50-60% of all kids have access to high quality early learning as a 3 or 4 year old. So those building blocks, dual when we can get it, certainly keeping in home language as long as possible, and making sure somebody is in front of that student who that student says, wow, they get me from a lot of perspectives, not the least of which is my language, and they honor that. We all know the research. If a kid connects with an educator, higher probability of graduation success. If a kid sees themselves by race in front of them at any point in their elementary setting, then their probability of persistence goes up. So whole child is more than is more than serving them when they walk through the door. It's a whole lot of other things that go in advance of it.
Fabulous, Superintendent. What an incredible call to action. Certainly acknowledge the importance here of strengthening diverse educator workforce pipelines. Lots of fabulous work coming out of Washington nationally with the growth of Grow Your Own programs and apprenticeships, the Hunt Institute's 1 Million Teachers of Color work. So fabulous, and we could talk about this issue for hours. Alicia, I would love to hear kind of from your perspective, your thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like I'd be echoing some of the thoughts shared thus far by Chris. I feel like you had a lot of great ideas, and I wonder if it's a similar context across the Western states. But certainly, systemic assets orientation is so important to counter deficit mindset that's been historically established. And California's vision for multilingualism, as outlined in the Global California 2030 goals and supported by the California Edge initiative, the State Seal of Biliteracy, biliteracy pathway recognitions, really focus on linguistic diversity as an asset to be celebrated and built upon. And that EL roadmap policy that I mentioned earlier was established to minimize the barriers to success experienced by some students, by many students classified as English learners. The EL roadmap elevates as a priority attention to that assets orientation to ensure that we're first considering English learners by the strengths and affordances that they bring to our educational system to serve as a foundation. Home language is a foundation upon which English proficiency can be built, and through appropriate supports, these students are effectively positioned for multilingualism and multiliteracy, and also enriching our schools. They enrich our schools and our communities with additional languages and cultures from which we can all learn and we can all benefit. These students aren't a homogeneous group, so I think it's important to acknowledge that, and we'd be gravely mistaken if we miss the opportunity to leverage their complexities and their identities and in their strengths. And I think here in our state, this assets-based stance really helps remind us that dual language students' strengths and needs are to be considered on the front end when designing inclusive initiatives and programs for students, effectively diminishing that deficit orientation. And it's a notion we must continue to message, I think, also to parents whose personal experiences navigating language in schools may have been different, perhaps more deficit oriented historically. We want families and communities to fully understand the value of home language and culture and education. And like Chris said, I feel like I want to echo the educator workforce and the importance of recruiting and retaining high quality teachers and high quality bilingual teachers, because access to high quality teachers helps support high quality English language development in the classroom. And the bilingual teacher shortage could inhibit expansion of access to dual language immersion programs and other multilingual programs. And we want to make sure that we establish a robust and culturally, linguistically, and experientially diverse educator workforce who's prepared to respond to the needs of English learner classified students and multilingual learners through preparation programs and via ongoing supports as part of in-service professional learning. I think this is essential to recruiting and sustaining a healthy pipeline of confident and efficacious teachers and school leaders. So we have to work really hard to find new ways to incentivize entry into the field of education, attract teachers who are culturally, linguistically, experientially diverse, and promote pathways into the bilingual educator workforce. In California, that means sometimes tapping into the State Seal of Biliteracy, students who graduate with that acknowledgement, or the California Mini Corps program, which supports migratory students by former migratory students in college. And we have to message the value and the importance of teachers in the larger social conversations, because the educators that we attract will ultimately become the leaders that build and sustain and continually improve programs for English learner students down the road. So we're really excited to be a part of efforts to lift that up.
Fabulous, Alicia. Thank you so much. Nilda, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Growing up as an EL student, communities were very important. Communities gave us what the school system sometimes couldn't give us, which is a sense of support, a sense of sharing. For example, if a child wasn't doing well in the homework, they would go to the neighbor and say, hey, your child's a little bit more advanced in English. Can they come over and help us and tutor my child? And I remember my mom was a teacher, and I remember my mom tutoring kids and helping kids in that community setting. And I always thought communities are so important, but many times there's a fear in our families that if they go outside that community and maybe try and get help at schools or services or organizations, that maybe their legal status would come into play, and they would be they'd be asking a whole lot of questions about, their legal status, and would make them nervous. So they kind of stayed within that community. My work with some of the school districts in the area where I live, I try to counteract that by perhaps being a bridge or being a liaison between the school and the community, and showing that, you know, the schools have the best interest of the students and the parents in mind, and giving those parents voices to be able to communicate that is essential and is critical, and helping those parents understand that the schools and the teachers and the principals are there to help. And so whenever we would have parent-teacher meetings, I would make sure that, I mean, I would even knock at the superintendent's door and say, you know, I really need you there. I need them to see you as a person that's genuinely invested in helping these students and helping the parents advocate for their children. And that's equity. You know, we talk a lot about equity, and we give it all these different labels, but that's equity. Being able to provide these parents with that sense of, wow, you know, I can count on the teachers and the principals and even the superintendent to come out to a parent meeting. That's powerful. And so I just feel that having those liaisons, having those translation services ready, available for our parents and our students is the wraparound services that we talk about, you know. And to me, based on my personal experience, I think that that's essential for the success of our students and our parents and our families.
You're exactly right, Nilda. Thank you so much for verbalizing that. What a powerful message. Dr. Snyder, would love to hear your thoughts, and then I certainly want to drill further into this conversation that's starting to emerge around engaging families and parents, but certainly want to hear your thoughts on this critical issue of providing wraparound supports and services at large.
Great, thank you. And I really want to build on what Nilda was saying and talking about, because I think when we're talking about challenges that students are facing, we want to make sure that we're hearing about those challenges from the families. So I think often when we're working with schools and districts, we see that there tends to be a one-way communication. So schools are sending information to families, they're sharing information about services that they feel families might need or students might need, but we don't necessarily always have that opportunity for two-way communication. So really trying to find a space for the families of our multilingual learners to have a safe space where they can share what are their challenges, what goals do they have, what questions do they have about their children's education. And this could mean having a focus group in families' home communities that's conducted in their home languages, that includes stakeholders from the community involved in the planning, and really creates that space for listening to the needs of our families. And in that way, I think we can begin to really identify what are those needs and how can we match families with organizations in the communities that are already doing that work. So again, trying to avoid some of that duplication of schools doing what other organizations might be doing. So thinking about how we can collaborate with community partnerships or community partners in order to really support the whole student or the whole child. But I really think it begins first by listening to families.
Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder. I would love to circle back just from Nilda's response, from your response, Dr. Snyder, and I think Alicia and the superintendent both alluded to this, but beyond, you know, the need to provide wraparound supports directly to students and to meet them where they are, I'd be curious to know if anyone has any additional strategies or policies or things that they have seen work really well in the field for engaging the families of these students in the educational process. That it's often cited as a barrier to reaching many of these students. So certainly welcome anyone's thoughts on particular things that they've seen work well for bringing in these critical stakeholder groups into these conversations. And I will, if anyone feels inspired to get us started, I certainly will yield the floor.
I think that one of the things that I've seen that works great is actually going out to the students' homes and doing those home visits. because that is one way where you make that initial connection at the beginning of the year. Is you go out, you meet with the parents, you meet with the community, and you establish that connection. And that's why I feel like having a community liaison, a school community liaison can do the legwork to establish that connection with the community before we even ask parents to come to the schools for open house and all of that. Do it the other way around, go out to the community, connect with the community, connect with the parents, connect with the businesses. Sometimes those businesses are so eager to collaborate with the families and the communities and the schools. And that, I think that's powerful, because you are not asking them, okay, come to me, come to the school, come see what I can give you. It's more like, go out to them and see what you can do for them. See how you can, get that started the other way around.
I'd build on that for sure. Nilla just really nails it here. It is about not being a passive system that says we're here if you find us, but rather we know we need to find you and support you. And I would say something as little as language translation of materials. Yeah, I've got districts with 200 languages being spoken in it, and I know the financial risk to that. But as Nilla pointed out earlier, in some communities, maybe your English speakers are only 25 or 50%. You grab a second language, Spanish, maybe you're up to 80% of your families. Maybe you grab that third language, Mandarin, in some of our areas. Suddenly 90% of families feel like you're trying to reach to them in a way that they say, this is a system that I want to put more energy into because it's putting energy back into me. So sometimes it's just as simple as language translation of materials. The other thing I will die on my sword for is that we have to keep thinking about how policy in all of the states shifts to the developing mind. And that means lots of supports, prenatal and then birth to 5. Our communities are complex. And I think particularly for MLs and ELs, they're getting an early learning experience that is often within neighborhood or community of commons. So they're building community, and then they go to a school that's got a bigger geographic area. And for the first time, they don't feel like they belong. So when schools reach out, Alicia talked about TK programs. We have those in Washington as well. But when we reach out to providers of early learning and even just traditional childcare and say, be ready, there's a kindergarten day coming your way, like there's a future here, and giving them the building blocks of the teaching and learning components, I mean, literally down to quantitative reasoning and number recognition and letter recognition. The more materials we can feed into early learning as a gift of like, this is for you, it doesn't cost you anything. If you can offer professional development in your K system, your K1, 2, 3 grades for early learning providers, some of you have regional education service districts or county service districts, letting them in on that so that they understand what they can do in building blocks, suddenly you build partnerships. So that's a message about much earlier and much more frequently when the child is even years before they start their traditional public school system.
Thank you, Superintendent, for that incredible list of actionable strategies. Alicia, I saw you just came off mute.
Yeah, I would love to build off that idea. In California, over the last couple of years, there has been legislation to help identify what we call dual language learners in our system. So these are students who are not yet in kindergarten and have not yet been identified or have not in general been identified as English learners, but perhaps in the early learning setting, they have a language and asset that is a language other than English in their home. And so there are points of outreach for those caregivers and those educators through a family language instrument and also a family language and interest interview. And I think that that's really important for a few reasons. I think one, it's identifying those needs early on and finding those points of connection with children and their families. I think it also invites parents, in a space in which they could be very vulnerable and hesitate to share about their language and cultural experience. I think this is an invitation to get them hooked into the school system as partners. So I feel like it's a demonstration of partnership, a demonstration of outreach, and a demonstration of care for child, from the youngest years on. And I think that starting that engagement early is really crucial to creating a solid foundation for that homeschool connection that we want to continue across K-12.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. This next question I want to ask, and then certainly want to pose a question to the group. But, we've talked a lot about academic supports, wraparound services, but I'd be curious if any of you have any perspectives or thoughts on the role of social emotional learning and student mental health for English language learners and multilingual students, and the role that investments and supports play in the success of these students overall. Certainly welcome reflections on the importance of investing in these types of support specifically.
I can respond to that. So we've been doing a lot more work around supporting students' social emotional learning and how that can be closely linked to the academics, the teaching of academics, and also reflecting as there's more talk about SEL in the schools. We see more packaged curriculum, really thinking about to the extent that these reflect the experiences of multilingual learners, and the awareness that we want to bring to educators, that so that when they are doing this LCL work, they're really bringing a cultural lens to that. And so some of the things that I think are really important is thinking about what are the materials and resources that we're sharing with students and the extent to which these reflect students' experiences and culture. So if we want to talk about decision-making, for example, or if we want to talk about relationship building, these facets of SEL, let's use resources and stories that represent those skills that are representative of students' experiences and backgrounds. I think that's really important. And when we're talking about expectations, for example, for relationship building or reflecting on selves, we want to be really thoughtful about the role that culture might play in that and give students an opportunity to talk about in their culture how that might be perceived. So I think really always having that culture lens on the SEL work is really important.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder. Oh, Superintendent.
Just everything Dr. Snyder said, and I would add, this is tier 1, tier 2 stuff, right? So you want to build these universal systems of support for all kids. SEL, we've got it in all of our standards. So we need every educator, the English teacher, the math teacher, the social studies teacher, thinking about how pedagogy, teaching and learning, instructional delivery is inclusive of how students work in teams or how they build relationships, as Dr. Snyder said. So I would say everything, yes, and have a tier 3 strategy, particularly in mental health. So not every state approaches it the same way, but sometimes our MLs and ELs have the least access to mental health supports when they need it, because there's a process to go through, there's a cost to go through, and a lot of times you're not going to find out there in the private sector that second language provider. So we have tried to build regional mental health networks in our state, grounded in our educational service districts. So they're school focused, but they're tapping into community resources. And I think anytime you can do that, you at least create the opportunity for a more diverse service delivery model for students who need mental health supports. If you're doing one school one at a time, in a lot of communities, the probability of finding a diverse mental health therapist or school psych who can really connect with kids is going to be small. So think regional is the message there.
And as an organization, NABE is always looking for ways in which to provide our educators that attend the conference a broader spectrum of topics. And so this year we included mental health, we included social emotional, we included emotional intelligences. And I mean, we've had them for a while, but this year in particularly, when we were receiving our abstracts, we noticed an increase in educators wanting to present on these topics, because it seems to be definitely a need for our educators and for our teachers to receive that professional development. So we have at NABE definitely seeing that increase and that interest.
Thank you so much, Nilda. We're coming up to the end of our time together, but I have one last question I would love to ask each of our panelists on the call today. We are joined by policymakers and leaders across the country that are focused on solving so many of the issues and challenges we've discussed today. We've talked about a lot of different approaches and strategies, but for those folks joining us today, what call to action or what strategies, supports, investments, policy levers do you believe could make the largest impact on students today and in the long term? What do you want folks to really leave with after our discussion today? Superintendent, I would love to send it your way first, and then would certainly welcome everyone's reflections as well.
Yeah, thank you. I was a 3-term House member in our state before becoming an elected state superintendent here, so I certainly understand the complexity of policymaking, whether it's a state board member who's here, or professional standards board person, or a local school board member, or a state legislator. I don't have a magic thing. I will say if there's a dream I have, it's that every child, or at least every family of a child, has the option of a 2-way dual language program. So it doesn't mean every school can turn these on. We don't even have the workforce to do it. But if every school district in the country said, we're going to create at least 1 elementary or 2 elementary schools where that choice is available to families within the public system, I think it's miraculous in its outcome. Here's the other thing I would say. If you're already inclined to support this work, you should speak 3 languages. This is what I always tell my team. Be prepared to talk to policymakers who just get it, right? They already get the brain science, the brain development, the cultural aspects of this. They just flat out get it, but have a reason why they should keep investing. There's a group of legislators and policymakers who see it from a civil rights standpoint, but they don't understand the mechanics of language. So they're not educators, and they don't know the brain science of it, but they know it's not fair that a kid comes to school who's brilliant, because all of our kids are brilliant, and they're struggling because of language. So they get the civil rights side of it. And then there's a bunch of them who just need the economic argument. How long can we live in a world where we're the one industrialized nation that says everyone must learn our language? Like, it's falling apart so fast. So economically, we have to be thinking about ELLs in the future. We're in a hemisphere where 3/4 of all the people in this hemisphere speak Spanish as their first or second language. English is very much a minority language in the Western Hemisphere. So thinking about that from a global trade standpoint, economic development standpoint, and our kids getting opportunities around the world, that there's a group of policymakers who need to hear it in those terms. So the brain science of dual language, the civil rights of dual and multilingual, and the economics of it, there is a different policymaker, and everyone should prepare arguments in all 3 of the domains.
Goodness, put that on a t-shirt. What a fabulous way to really solidify just the crux of the issue and the roadmap that we need in order to solve it. Really, really appreciate you joining us, Superintendent, and appreciate your thoughts. Nilda, would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I had an opportunity 5 years ago to work as a consultant in Spain, and I was there to train teachers on how to identify and serve gifted students, potentially gifted students. But while I was there, I was just blown away by how many people speak 2 or 3 or 4 different languages. And I was just like, wait a minute. So why can't we do this back in the States? Why is it such a big deal to get dual language programs off the ground? Why is it such a big deal for us to find qualified, certified, proficient, teachers who are proficient in these languages? I mean, I provided consulting at a school that were teaching 4 languages. And I was just like blown away. I'm like, my goodness gracious, how do they do this? And why can't we do this? And we have so many immigrants in this country that's come with so many, languages. Why don't we tap on that? Those are resources that come to the schools, bring their children to our schools. Why don't we tap on those resources and talk to them about becoming educators? Talk about, them even coming into the classroom and conversing with the students. I mean, in Spain, there were people that would go into the classrooms, converse with the students in a language. They were not educators. They were just there to talk to the students in German or all these different languages. And we lose so many opportunities because we certainly have a country where more immigrants come to than any other nation in the world. But yet we are not honing into those, opportunities.
Thank you so much, Nilda. Really appreciate it. Dr. Snyder, would certainly love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I love all the discussion of dual language programs and, the need for multiple languages to be learned and spoken in the United States. So I certainly agree with that. But I just want to add on this idea of professional learning for educators and time for collaboration, because we really emphasize the need for teachers to have an opportunity to collaborate, our content teachers with our English language development teachers, in order to really support the implementation of those instructional practices that we know to be effective with multilingual learners. But the reality is often there's not that time, right? Or we have one-off PDs without kind of embedded coaching, job embedded coaching that can really support teachers in reflecting and thinking about their practice. We know educators want to do the best for their students, but we have to give them time. We have to give them professional development, and opportunities to reflect on what they're doing and how they can improve their practice and better meet the needs of their students.
Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder. And finally, Alicia.
Thanks so much. I think I'd say, even before talking about policy, I'd say go visit a dual language program. Visit one, look at the classroom, see what the impacts are. I think you'll be amazed by the academic experience, the outcome, the robust nature of instruction, but you'll also get the warm fuzzies. And I feel like the warm fuzzies really help formulate the why for us. But I think with regard to investments, I think acknowledging that those initial one-time investments are really helpful to jumpstart programs. But in order to create sustainable programs, we need to see long-term investments into those programs in order to keep them running and moving and growing. And then second, I think continue to invest in the workforce. We have this prime opportunity to tap into not only those dual language programs, but other initiatives as well, in order to, again, create that workforce that is ready for multilingual learners, that has the capacity and the confidence, the efficacy, the background, and is also representative of the students that we serve.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And that call for investment and long-term workforce solutions certainly brings close to home. I would like to thank Superintendent Rakedahl, Dr. Snyder, Alicia, Nilda, all of our panelists for joining us today for this important and timely discussion. Again, the entire Hunt Institute team, really appreciate you taking time out of what I can only imagine are incredibly busy schedules to join us. Now, before closing today's discussion, I would like to draw everyone's attention to our upcoming K-12 webinars. Our next conversation will be next month, Thursday, December 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, where education leaders from across the country I dropped right at the end. It was so close. I don't know where I cut out, so I might repeat myself. But we have a webinar next month on December 14th, exploring the challenges and triumphs of 2023 and a roadmap of 2024. So please be sure to register for that if you're interested. We have a great lineup as evidenced on your screen. And we also encourage you to join us for other webinars listed on the next slide. And you can register for these discussions by going to our website, which we will post in the chat. And with that, thank you all. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us today. And we hope to see you again real soon. Thank you all so much.